Hello, thank you for coming out at this very busy time.
Hello. You can move up if you like. You seem far away. There's a group back there. I mean, I relate. I always like to sit in the back of the theater, but
Yeah, totally.
So.
Like WHR, St. Mark's,
Uh-oh. We got a heckler. Welcome, everybody. We're here to celebrate Black Lodge, the opera collaboration between David Little, composer, and Anne Waldman, librettist and poet. And for those of you who don't know yet, the opera has been nominated for a Grammy as Best Opera Recording. That's the category, Best Opera Recording. And the Grammys take place on February 4th, so between now and then, do everything you can to help out. But anyhow, so I have had the good fortune to see a feature film version of Black Lodge and also a live performance done by Philadelphia Opera. And I want to talk to David and Anne about the genesis of this piece, but I just want to say first that it came about at a time and was slated to be a live performance when COVID hit. So then all of a sudden the plan changed and they decided to make a feature film, which is incredible. You should try to see it. And we're going to see a little bit of it tonight. But then as time went on and things opened up, they were able to do this theatrical performance, and maybe David can tell us more in a minute if there are other performances slated. But there is this CD of Black Lodge, and that is what is. Anne has a copy here. It's up for Grammy. So yeah, just before we start, I'd like to say that this moment is very exciting for me in terms of opera. Opera is something I have looked at and thought about through the years, in the sense that I feel that opera companies have realized that they've been losing some of their audience, and in order to stay relevant, we've been seeing a movement of a lot of opera companies, the Met for one, looking to younger contemporary composers, and they've been commissioning operas, and so the other side of that is it's an exciting moment for composers because there are these opportunities to do collaborations on a large scale. And also, I want to say from the angle of poets, librettists, by the way, are not always poets, and I would say they're not often poets. I've heard that it's hard for a poet to turn their words into a libretto, often. We can talk about that, how this process was. But a number of poets that I know, at least 3 or 4 or 5 that I can think of offhand, are engaged in opera projects. So, I want to talk a little bit, I want to ask you both about the history of word and music and where you both fit in on that. But before we even get to that, I'd like to talk about the genesis of this piece, Black Lodge. And David, as I understand it, you came to Anne with this very specific idea, which I find so intriguing, which you gave her this troika of figures and said, do something with this.
Right.
Is that right?
Well, it actually starts a little before that. So it started with a conversation I was having with the producer, Beth Morrison, who's here tonight. And Beth has really shepherded this project from the very beginning to where it is now. So we owe a great debt to Beth Morrison, so thank you, Beth. It started with a conversation about an idea for an opera as a serializing Twin Peaks, the original series. And this was about now, I guess, almost 11 years ago. And I remember I said, well, let me think about it, because it's an interesting idea. And I ultimately said, but Beth, I mean, that would take me 10 years to write that. So I don't know that I can commit to that sort of thing. And then 10 years later, we only just finished Black Lodge. But what was interesting for me in that process is, when a trusted collaborator suggests you check something out, you check it out. And so I dug back into Twin Peaks. And what I found, that it just happened to be around the same time I was reading Artaud's The Theater and Its Double, which the sort of collision of those two brought to mind William S. Burroughs and Naked Lunch. And I found myself realizing, like seeing this thing that they shared between the three of them, that they felt or were pursuing some sort of cosmic, consistent truth between them. And I went back to Beth a month or two later and I said, that's what I want to write a piece about, is that thing we can't identify. And Beth, being Beth, said, cool, let's do that. Because she is also someone who trusts her collaborators and artists. So it was at that point that I said, well, who should write the text for this? And I said, well, I was just a couple of years ago, I guess, or maybe, I forget how long, prior to this we had met, but I said, I was at this artist center with Anne Waldman, and she's so great, and I think this might be really interesting to her. So I reached out and I said, hey, Anne, would you be interested in this? And I was delighted that you said yes.
What did you?
Well, I thought it was a hard assignment for, I've said this before, a feminist. And I wanted to feel comfortable with the William Burroughs piece, William being a friend and having worked at Naropa and being books I've published and somebody I consider a kind of mentor and very important for a number of reasons through his work, but also very difficult, controversial, outsider figure. And more and more the piece seemed to evolve around karma, redemption. Is there redemption after this existential darkness, to put it sort of succinctly? And he was so honest in a way in his texts, about the dark spirit, writing his way out of this, pinpointing the time of the accidental death of Joan Fulmer, but there's such vivid moments in that story of, cataclysmic. We don't explore all that in the libretto or the opera, but this was happening in Mexico. There was child involved and so on. So complicated. William was not alive, so that was a little easier. But I did work with his estate a bit, and there was support there for using. That was the other thing. I wasn't going to quote Burroughs without a certain permission, and also I wasn't going to translate Burroughs into my own poetry. And I thought of cut-up method, of course, which would be complicated. Cutting up. I've done cut-ups with work of his, but that didn't seem appropriate. So it was a little bit to think on, to chew on. And then Artaud. I went to Clayton Eshelman's translations. There are many. There are others like Jack Hirschman, and incredible books on. And that I remember Artaud was a figure for Susan Sontag and so on. So, history with Artaud. I also had read that book in college, and it was very important, the theater and Stubble, et cetera, and worked with certain texts and performance. And that was very magnetizing. And the thought of doing some of it in French. And when we did a certain kind of reading of early text, I was writing a lot more than is in the libretto itself. I was very involved with the Artaud being, essential in a way. And then it was originally called for a while Artaud and the Black Lodge. And then we had to give that up. I had a little bit of, doubt. And,
we had talks about that.
Yeah, we had talks about that. And I know Beth was in on that, and people didn't necessarily know who he was. And as a poet, I always think, well, that's more of a reason to use the name.
And how about David Lynch? Because
David Lynch
is alive, and
very much
do you
alive.
know him? Is that somebody
Not
that you
personally,
have
no.
a friendship with or anything?
Again, quite familiar with the work, and that sort of schizophrenia of the normal and the unnormal, and the wit of it all, and the irony and the fear and panic. It was very Burroughsian in a way, but also brought it into our culture.
Did you contact him at all while you were working on this?
Not while I was working on it.
But we did have.
Yeah.
There's some of his text is used, and we did get permission for that.
Yeah, we had to get permission. And I also thought I was working with the 6 realms of Tibetan Buddhism, where you have the hell realm, the hot hells, the cold hells, and then you move into the animal realm, and you move into the human realm, which is considered the place for the most opportunity for enlightenment and communication, although I'm doubting that these days. And then the hungry ghost realm, which is very much in this piece, the hungry ghost, and there's a whole, sort of text on that. The hungry ghost who sings in lamentation. And then moving into that, this sense of the hunger of addiction, which Burroughs and both Artaud to some extent. And I think Lynch was not maybe as personally, I don't know his whole life story, but there was Artaud was in 5 different asylums, lots of shock treatment. William, it brings in shock treatment into his work. There's the electricity always of in Lynch's movies. So I was finding common ground. And in the animal realm, Bill's fear of the centipede and the rabbits in Lynch, and there's all kinds of stuff in Artaud as well. So finding these points of correspondence, that was kind of how I took it at first. And I wrote a long text about the realms and this kind of
Which
stuff.
is fabulous. The full text, I really hope you publish this someday, Anne, because it's really good, and I want everyone to experience it.
Could you talk a little bit about, so when you received the text, I'm interested in the process of turning, text into libretto, or into sung words in your composition.
So we had I had a really unique experience, and it hasn't happened before, and it hasn't happened since, where we did this reading at Here Arts of the first full sort of performance, really, of this original text.
And Bob Holman's
and it was phenomenal. And after that, I thought, well, what is there for me to do? This piece doesn't need me. And I had to take a year away from it to kind of forget that performance, because it was really, I wish you all could have been there, because it was so great. But it really kind of messed me up in a way, and it was quite a while later that I was able to go back to the text kind of just as text, and I think that may have been when the question of me approaching that text and sort of doing a cut up of the full text and a sort of distillation, and then that was what I said. So what is now in the final libretto of the opera is a kind of cut up distillation of Anne's full text. Artaud in the Black Lodge.
And so the other thing we should mention is that this piece involves this incredible singer, Timur, who is, as I understand, trained in opera and Baroque opera in particular, and also is the leader of a band, goth rock. Is that the great genre?
Well,
Correct
I think
term?
maybe there's definitely some goth overlap, kind of glam overlap. I think it's evolved over time. Klaus Nomi, I think, is an important early. But I know I first heard them. They played on the Prototype Festival, which is Beth Morrison's festival, and I heard them play a kind of cabaret version of Nine Inch Nails' "Closer," and I thought, well, this is the guy. Anybody who can pull that off, I was just like...
It's an incredible voice. You were talking earlier about his instrument, and you wanted to create something for that, right?
Well, yeah, and
That's
so
part of it.
originally, there being these 3 characters, there was a thought, well, maybe it's for 3 singers. And as the sort of... As I lived with the piece more and more, and as Timur became more involved in the project, it became clear we only needed him, because he had all 3 of those voices. He has a kind of baritone range, a tenor range, and a kind of countertenor range. And in the course of writing the piece, I write for all of that. I think I use every single note that he has. And to his credit, I have to say he has not once, maybe once, complained about it, but only once. Because he's...
It's a good average.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's quite challenging, and he really, in this Grammy category, the singer is really, the singers are kind of foregrounded in the nomination, and it's so deserving, because he really he is the show. He carries the whole show, and it's been really rewarding. He's now, of course, become a dear friend as well.
Should we see the clip that you have, and do you want to say anything about it before we see it?
Sure.
We'll come back after.
Good transition. So this is a clip from the film. This is the song Electric Cerberus, which is the first. There's a brief introduction in the film, and then this kicks in, and it sets up a version of what will be circled back to and sort of re-examined repeatedly throughout the rest of the film. So it sort of gives you an incomplete snapshot of a lot of gestures, and you'll have to see the full film to see how they all work out.
There's a dancer in this scene too, who's very important.
Yeah, Jennifer Harrison Newman, who's phenomenal, also was choreographing this passage. And it's directed by Michael Joseph McQuilkin, who I believe is now going by Michael VQ, and a whole team of amazing people.
I just wanted to say something about the intricacy of the work itself, but also all these people involved. I don't think I've been involved with something quite like this. I mean, I've had to help develop and found and administrate a school with a lot of people and magazines and this and that and various performances with dancers and so on. But the particulars and the incredible, obstacles of COVID and all that, and how you overcame them, and everybody working together. And when Michael came in,
Well, that might be also interesting, just before we see it, to set that up a little bit in terms of that transition from live to the film, because we had a meeting in Los Angeles at CalArts, who was a co-commissioner, co-developer of the project, in, I think it was January or February of 2020. And that's where we worked out the story, because I wasn't writing, in a typical opera, you're sort of telling a story, and this, because it was exploring a feeling and this sort of psychological state and the spiritual state, it didn't quite have that. And so to put it on stage, we kind of needed to figure out what we were going to put on stage. And so we had this meeting with Jennifer and Beth and Michael and me at CalArts to kind of figure out what that would be. And the original idea is that it would be a kind of installation piece where the audience would move freely through these different spaces, and gradually the story would be revealed to them. And my favorite part of it is that the first scene of this would be 200 members of an audience squeezed into a very, very small space. And then, of course, 6 months later, we said, well, no one's ever going to go to that show ever again, so let's rethink this. And that's when the idea, Michael McQuilkin was already on board to direct. He also happened to be a filmmaker. And so we said, oh, well, that's what it should be. And what was amazing is, for years, Beth and I had talked about, what is this piece? And this idea of an installation opera was where we had landed as almost like the best solution we had found to what this piece was meant to be. It's really an experimental piece in this way. And when this moment happened, we said, oh, it was always meant to be a film. We just didn't, we were so geared toward thinking of it as a live event, that option hadn't even occurred to us. And so the pandemic, by forcing us to rethink, especially in opera and theater, like in everything else, rethink how performance is presented, it revealed to us what the piece had always really meant to be.
That's interesting, yeah. Good.
So shall we see Electric Cerberus?
Yeah, let's see it, and then we'll come back.
Great.
For some more.
Broken limbs, fractured face, holes magic. A madman survives the ministrations of the doctors, the nurse, prophet eating the rotting bodies of the dead. Is a body, a weight, a resting of a face, the compressed magnet coming back from the dead on the wheel of a hellish life. The howling, three-headed Cerberus, without doctors, no patience. Da, 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 da. Without doctors, no disease skulls. Da, da. Butcher whip to flame to torment. Doctors, doctors, doctors cause human sick society. Coming back from the dead on the wheel of a hellish life. A three-headed Cerberus. Cut, coop, sucked by larva. Medicine lice. Broken limbs, fractured face. Some bargain in this botched life. Cracked and missing teeth. Holes for a demon. Diabolic feeding. What's missing in a tortured body? Electricity is a body, a weight, a resting of a face, the compressed magnet, repressed surface from the outside of a savage blood. I go through it. I go, don't forget it. I go through it. I go, don't forget it. I go through it. I go, don't forget it. I go through it. I go, don't forget it. I go through it. I go, don't forget it.
Setting the stage back up. Thank you. Yeah, it's always great to, I see it so often on my computer screen. It's really cool to see it on a bigger surface like that.
Yeah.
So that is a preview of the Electric Cerberus video, which will be released next week. So if you want to see it again, it'll be up on, I think we're not sure exactly. Hopefully there'll be a media partner we'll be releasing it. I'm waiting to hear back on that. But it'll be out in the world and you can check it out. And of course the album is out so you can hear it. But and then hopefully the full film, we're working on some distribution stuff at the moment. So hopefully the full film will be viewable via your favorite digital
And you'll hear a
service
string
provider.
quartet.
And there's a string quartet as well. Yeah, the string quartet doesn't really show up
Real-timers.
in this excerpt, but
Well, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. So in this piece that we saw, interesting to me, I've seen it a few times, but what struck me now is kind of the transitions between this very kind of pulsating, almost strident tone, and then this much more mellifluous, flowing sections with the snow. I'm not sure if you were able to catch all the words. I couldn't, but now that I've looked at the libretto, so this is just a little section of what we just saw. Broken limbs, fractured face, some bargain in this botched life, cracked and missing teeth, holes for a demon, diabolic feeding, what's missing in a tortured body, electricity is a body, a weight, a resting of a face, the compressed magnet, repressed surface from the outside of a savage blow. And I'm here also in addition to those three figures we talked about earlier, I'm hearing a little Bertolt Brecht in there. And, but I'm just wondering, I want to talk to you a little bit about, we've mentioned already that it's not like one single narrative. There's sort of glimpses of, I guess, shock treatment in this section. But it's a pretty grim scenario there's one scene which I think is the part of the David Lynchian scene, which is that more kind of calm, but of course it's that,
my childhood,
terrifying
My
calm
childhood. He's
of,
talking
yeah,
about my childhood
which
used
is,
to be this and cherry blossoms.
but other than that, it's like a lot of fractured
think this was
limbs and
what was
suffering,
called
and I
for.
know that's what, is something
what I'm
that
all
we have
about.
talked about. Yeah. But, yeah, I was wondering if you could talk a little
Well, I
bit
wanted
about
to say
that,
something
like-
about the work of David Sainu. I
The
mean,
tone.
it's spare in a way. The language, it's not overwritten. It's right to the heart of a sort of emotional context that's working with the music, that's a state of mind, and exploring these Bardo states or whatever, electric shock. You see him carrying the body.
One
It's
section is
actually
called
Trump-
Punishment Deserved.
Yeah,
Right.
punishment deserved. That's some of David's titling and sort of
Interrogate
capturing-
the suspects, attach electric drills to the teeth.
Yeah.
I'll give you the shocks to the brain, bells and lights.
Right. I mean, that's a lot of David's, I think, desire for setting, this idea of a trauma, existential trauma, and the trauma of in relation to this figure, female, as it happens to be, having been somebody in electric shock, maybe going through some kind of, all that's very familiar to me, hospitals and trauma of our time, this mental sort of collapse and breakdown, and the anxiety, fear, panic, just in what's going on in our time with so much death and suffering and pain and hospitals and not saving the world. It's who has not wanted to scream like every day
Yeah.
for the
yeah.
longest time. So I don't know if it felt less. I mean, I've always had watching this and hearing it. It's very intense.
Yeah.
And then, but it moves into these more general
It
states. Why
does. don't
you say something about
Yeah.
the intensity of that? And it's set up in the beginning with this kind of, you're in maybe in another altered state, the
Right.
Black Lodge, et cetera, with the figures swinging. It's a sense of time passing, of karma, judgment day, all those things come to mind. So in a way, it has a very almost literary, apotheosis, et cetera. All those things come to mind of what is this consciousness going through, and what is its reckoning, and what is
Yeah.
going to happen.
I mean, my work, as Anne said, my work has tended to always be pretty intense. And interested in challenging things, you know, in difficult subject matter. And I've said, Beth and I have talked about this, that I feel a certain responsibility because I feel like I can deal with that material, and I just, for whatever reason, I can psychologically handle it. And I feel that because of that, I sort of have a responsibility too, because I have colleagues who I know can't, and that's fine, you know. But I feel like that kind of work is important to put into the world, and because I can do it, I feel like I should do it. That said, I will say that this piece kind of pushed me as far as I could go, and in a way, for me, it became a question of, you know, how far into this material can I go before I won't be able to get back. And it became kind of a reckoning with depression, personally, and questions of how I want to exist in the world. So in a way, even though it's about these three figures and it's not text that I wrote, it became an incredibly personal piece for me, an incredibly personal journey for me. And it's been really touching that, you know, especially since the news of the nomination came out, I've been getting notes from people who have been telling me that they've had similar experiences listening to it, which has meant a lot. That does come through somehow, even though it's not ever saying it, you know, directly. And I think the thing that in the piece and in the process of writing it, there entered a moment where there are moments of real beauty and grace that emerge. And they don't necessarily win the day, but they're there and they fight for their space. And I think that's also a part of that experience for me. And I think that this idea of beauty fighting to come into existence is kind of part of it. And I feel like that's also part of your texts, you know,
Yeah.
and part of the spirit of it.
I wanted to say, I showed the film this summer to students this last summer, and one student, an older student who had served in Vietnam, served in Afghanistan, he had father in Vietnam. But anyway, he had to walk out at one point. It was so intense, and said he'd have to look at it later, maybe in pieces. That was interesting.
What was the process like of, working with the text? Was there a lot of back and forth between you two, or did you just basically get the text and compose the music?
Well, I got the full text, and then we did the sort of distillation, and I think I ran that by you.
Yeah.
And anything that was, I'm always, I want to make sure to respect the author, and so if there's anything that, I don't think there was much that I asked to change. It was really
more
just
some decisions you had to make, and then as things moved into the movie too, there were more questions in a way.
Right.
And I hadn't seen, we couldn't, I was in lockdown in Colorado for a long time.
Right.
And then I was in Mexico with my family, my son's family. And so we were, things were limited. There was this idea of trying to get to the shoot of the desert scene. It just was so scary to get out there alone on the desert somewhere.
Yeah. It was scary.
I know.
It was very hot, also, very hot. But yeah, I think, for me, whenever I'm setting text, it's all about, there's a point in the process of developing a libretto where, for me, it just starts to sing. I start to hear things.
You were sending me music too.
Yeah.
So other music he was working on, I felt always interested. I think your range is extraordinary.
Oh, thank you. But I think, I also really believe in the subconscious, and that this piece already existed, and it was just, we were uncovering it, we were finding it, and this one was tricky. It took a while to actually figure out what it was meant to be and what it was trying to say, but I think, there was the moment where it kind of clicked in, and we said, oh, now I understand,
Right, because it's not based on a story. There's no one arc of a story that goes all the way through.
But there still has to be a dramatic arc. You still have to feel the shape of it. It still has to deliver.
Must have been tricky to find.
Yeah,
And
it was tricky.
It's really so interesting
because I was also in that sort of dealing with my own personal stuff, right? So, and I didn't want to make it about that. Like, I didn't want it to be a piece about that. But it was also, I was working through things while writing the piece, while keeping them separate. It was kind of weird in a way, But I think, at a certain point, as I've developed as a composer, you just learn to trust that your instincts are gonna tell you what's right, and they're not gonna lie to you or let you down. And so there were definitely moments where I finished it and I said, well, I think it works. But we even, there was a cut we made.
Yeah.
There's one scene that was cut quite far along in the process, and because we realized we didn't need it,
I really like the production at the opera because we had, there were these separate things, the way things were placed. You had Timor in one kind of arena and the vibe there, and then the electric musicians up above, and then the more formal quartet from the Philly Opera on stage, and just watching how that kind of worked. And then, of course, Timor holding it together with the, his range and being able to move into these different sort of states of mind. But that brought it into a new performative
I agree.
context. And then you also had the film.
Right, so yes, that's Timor lip syncing to himself on screen, which is pretty wild to see, and he was amazing at it. And it brought it into this whole other, like a fourth dimension almost. And that production, there are going to be more outings of that in the future. I'm not sure how much I can say. Of the theatrical performance.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you. So is
there's
that
interest abroad.
Yeah, there's some talks happening, so there's definitely going to be some stuff. So keep an eye out, and maybe we can. I don't know what we can say, but soon.
there are numbers? So in the libretto, sections are identified by titles, but also places and dates, and that don't necessarily come through in what you see, but they're there behind the scenes, and a little bit of Walt Whitman backwards, it says, on track. Does that mean it's a recording?
There's a recording that is, it's supposed to be Walt Whitman, but I think it's not actually Walt Whitman.
Okay.
Was that the first ever recording
on
wax?
I think that's
on wax.
Very high voice.
That's yes,
America, center of equal daughters,
Yeah.
equal sons.
and that's in reverse.
But what is if you feel like talking about this, the role of these places and these dates that are very just various because they're actual dates and places that correspond to moments in the lives of these three figures?
For me, I think that was David's plan of how to shape it, maybe for the album, because they were almost like separate songs. So there was a track list, which was a whole other emanation of this project, which is many things already. So I remember, when this was happening, how that was it'd be like editing a magazine or some chapters, or so there was this literary thing being sort of placed on this with the times and dates and sort of kind of document or faux documentation, but it was organized, I thought, sort of specifically around this kind of the narrative of an album.
I think of those as just kind of clues.
Clues.
Like if you see a city and a date, and you look at the text, you can sort of deduce what that's talking about. Maybe.
Petrograd.
Yeah.
Well, that comes out of Burroughs' image. This idea of placing, a recorded text and a made-up sound. Just putting these things together that can cause, a riot, change in, a moment in history.
Perception. Well, that's
changing perception.
What is the quote that we were talking about earlier? The Burroughs quote that if you cut the present, the future pours out.
Yeah.
Am I getting that right?
Future will come out.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's the thing I've done in a couple pieces where there's a title and then there's the text and then there's a date or a place or a date and a place that accompanies the title and the text, and it is layers of narrative, and it's there if you want it, but you don't need it. It's not, you're not going to not get it if you don't understand what's happening in Blairstown in 1986, for example. But if you want to dig into it, for me, it's partially just what I value as a listener and as a viewer. I want to have layers to dig into. I want to keep getting further into the material, whether it's a film or a book, or so I think that's just it's become a sort of thing that I tend to do.
No, when you see the film, you're not chopping it into these sort of
Right.
distinct
the film is the arc.
seamlessly.
Yeah.
So I think the ending of it is kind of this almost incantation that refers to magic amulets Is that right? And then the last line, I think, is magic pain.
Yeah.
So is there some kind of sense of that there's an ending with an incantation for, I don't know, what is the role of magic in all of this?
Well, there's the sympathetic magic of the viewer. You know, I've been thinking a lot about the gaze in cinema and how, you know, what's demanded of you. And for me, the Burroughs, there's a moment in the film where is he forgiven? That comes up at the end, and the dance figure who's mute throughout shakes her head. And, you know, it could have gone either way, or it couldn't, maybe wasn't going to be there, but that's a very charged moment. And it's not that Burroughs intentionally did this. I have to think of, you know, coincidence, synchronicity, all these things that he was so much about in his writing and how things came to him in dreams and so on. But I mean, it became more about the essence of something for me and out of the Burroughs assignment, more than, I mean, there are, you know, incredible moments with the Lynch sense of the, you know, the uncanniness of our realities, but there was something in the tragedy in a way around, there was a tragedy in Artaud as well, and we're all in this, you know, the realms, the various realms of Hungry Ghost and death itself and lack of, and warring God realm. I mean, everything was playing out in my original sort of view of that.
And where did
But
the
those are the
name
last-
come from?
The pain?
The Black Lodge, the name, and the pain.
Well, there's an older backstory about Black Lodge, and I was finding it in Burroughs and the White Lodge, and then there's reference in Lynch specifically.
Lynch,
I don't think in Artaud we found.
No, not in Artaud, but the idea of the Black Lodge predates Burroughs and Lynch, and so it is something that you find in the old Theosophic writings from the end of the 19th century, in these sort of magic circles, you know, these alchemical circles, these magical circles. And I think for me, this idea of magic and magic pain, it has a couple different meanings. I mean, I think part of it is, you know, for me, what emerged through this process was this sense of a kind of, and what really started the whole process is this sense of a sort of some kind of common spiritual objective or, you know, thing, but that to get through that, and I think this is another, I keep quoting Burroughs, but there's something in the program notes for this that he said, you know, to get to heaven you have to go through hell, right? And that idea that there is a suffering that has to happen to get to that place, and you know, I started thinking of the lives of these three artists as representing that in a way. Lynch, I think less so, but Lynch is also, I think, you know, through so engaged in meditation that maybe is part of that same story. I'm not sure, so yeah, I think there's a you know, you can really dig down into this piece and get into some pretty, I think some spiritual questions that maybe don't seem very clear on the surface, but I think they're really there. And I think the magic pain aspect, it also that last bit, and it also starts the piece, is a quote from a piece of mine called "Dressed in Magic Amulets Dark from My Feet," which is about how in the time of Christ's crucifixion, people would wear nails that were used in crucifixions as magic amulets. And this, obviously, I have adopted this. and so this idea that you know, that in sort of Christ's suffering and all of this is a big part of that.
There's a crucifix in the movie.
There's a crucifix in the film, right? Which we didn't talk about. Michael just sort of sensed it, I think, right? So yeah, so many layers.
And also, you know, from the Buddhist perspective, I mean, the word you might use rather than magic would be tantric, or something about changing the energy or taking it on and transmuting, that sort of thing. But and the basic premise, I mean, it all starts with suffering exists. Yes, suffering exists. The way out of suffering is, rather than, you know, it's your own consciousness that gets you into things. There's no outside thing that's going to save you, exactly. So it's really on you, and that's the dilemma, the existential dilemma of the character who, you know, inadvertently kills the wife and has this, you know, extraordinary pain and all that. And Burroughs himself talked about how he had to write his way out of that, and it drove his writing in a way. But it was a sort of nightmare always.
Should we see if anyone would like to ask you some questions from the
Sure.
audience? Would
Sure.
anybody like to?
So just let me get this straight. You're using a lot of text from these three people. Yes?
I would say
No,
a lot.
not a lot. I would
Not a
say it's very spare, actually, what's on here. You know, you can read the
You mean the link?
The actual words.
Then let me get it straight. These three characters coexist in your singer Timor.
I would say in the piece, so this gets into something that's a little complicated, which is the difference between the piece and the film. So the film is, I would say, an interpretation of the piece. The piece itself could be staged a bunch of other ways, and maybe in the future that will happen. But so in the film, Michael, the director, identified the sort of visual landscape as the realm of Lynch, the sort of style of the characters. He identified the narrative that Timur's character would go through as connected to the Burroughs story, and he identified the idea of seeing theatrical artifice as coming from Artaud. So they became sort of touch points for him, but I don't think it's true that in the film Timur is playing all three of them. But you
It's
can
not like
Is
the
there a
character.
name for that character?
he's just called the man.
The man.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay, the only other thing I say is, what about super titles in here? Because the words are wonderful. Too bad you can't understand them.
We do have them for the live performance. There are titles, and when it becomes available streaming, there should be captions as well. So that we do have that that material to be rolled out on the horizon.
Any other points?
I think I stalked you this afternoon, and there's a clip of you talking about the difference between entertainment and art,
Mm-hmm.
and which I thought was interesting. But now you've obviously put so much thought into this piece. Are you letting it go now and letting us do whatever we want in our heads with it? That are you talking about different ways of staging it, different ways? Is it like out there now?
Yeah. I mean, if there's another production of this someday, I would love to be involved and have conversations with the director and the singer who do it. It's so specific that it's very possible that won't ever happen, and this will be the version of it that lives and that exists. But I want this to belong to the world now, and I've sort of, I think for me, typically when there's a recording that is out, then I step back. So I welcome all the possible interpretations of it now.
Did you have a question?
Congratulations. I look forward to seeing it. Now, and the feminist in me asks, how many female characters are there in the actual libretto?
Well, so the libretto, it's only this one singer.
Oh,
So it's only Timur is the only character who sings. Jennifer, the dancer, plays, I think it's 4 or 5 different characters, but who are the nurse and the barman, who are all who are all possibly the same character, and that's open for interpretation.
And we knew that from the start. We talked about a dancer
Mhm.
who would not be speaking,
Yeah.
but was representing a kind of, not foil exactly, but a counter energy. And they were very much in this dynamic. It's an unusual dynamic.
And also say in terms of, gender of performers is a thing I'm very conscious about. And so the string quartet who recorded is the Azara String Quartet in Los Angeles, who are all women, female identifying performers. And for in Philadelphia, I would say the band, even though in the film everyone in the rock band is male identifying, that was not the case in Philadelphia. We had some different performers. So this is something that Beth can attest. We're always having discussions about it and making sure it's everyone is invited.
Yeah, and how it moves to the world after these manifestations could be quite open.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Yeah.
I have a question about the contribution of film editing, because because film editing was obviously vital to the expression of this piece, as I just saw it just now, and I had not, I haven't seen the live performance, but you had said at some point that you thought, oh, this was meant to be a film. And looking at the piece that I saw just now, I can see why you would think that if that kind of film editing was so much a part of it, where you had the layering of characters and the layering of pieces of time and stuff that you can't do on stage. So I just wondered whether, having made the film and having had all that wonderful film editing, whether that changed how you felt about the live performance piece.
Oh, when we did it live in Philadelphia, no, because the film is still central to the live performance.
So the film is first, even though the live performance is the thing, and this is a variation of it, even though this has so much extra contribution.
Well, so
from the editing.
yeah, so when we do the live performance, it's basically we have a giant screen and we're screening the entire film, and then all the music is performed live.
I see.
So it's kind of like it is a film screening with live music, and the live music, having the music live makes it this. For me, I found it to be a really transformed experience, but it's still kind of the same show.
So you have both.
Yeah. So it's not like there's a stage version that is a different thing, and then there's the film. This is all through the Beth Morrison Project's, umbrella, and so there are these two different versions of it that can
performed and sung live, just to be clear.
Yeah.
So that's an incredible performance that you can see live when it's done again.
It's really, it's definitely, if you can catch it next time it comes around, I'm biased, but I think it's really special.
I'll second that.
Oh, okay, we can say New York 2025.
That's coming up soon.
Yes.
Hi, congratulations, first of all. And I have a question. We're in the age of a lot of opera being seen in movie theaters, and of course that's something a lot of American musicians first experience opera through PBS or through some other broadcast. How do you relate to that presentation of your work, or its experience, all contained in some sort of screen, versus what you've designed for yourself in this moment, and other works of yours that incorporate media? How do you feel about the other thing, and why is it that you create the live music video, hybrid that you have in this?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think, I had an interesting experience where this was the third opera film that I was involved with. The first two I was not able to be on set because of COVID precautions, because the first one was made before, I think the vaccines hadn't rolled out. We were filming this just as people were starting to get vaccinated. So the first two were completely pre-vaccination. And I became a composer because of film. That was sort of how I got started. So for me, it feels really comfortable, and I'm really happy to be back working in this kind of a setting. And I do think it allows, like you said, the editing of a film allows you to do different things. I mean, this idea that, when the nurse blows a kiss and suddenly it's Timur blowing a kiss to himself on the gurney, that gesture kind of comes back many times throughout the film, and you can't do that on stage. So I do think they allow for different things. They make different things possible. And I think we're in a time where we're trying to answer that question. We're trying to find where is the overlap, what things can be done on stage, what things can't be done on stage. I think a lot of the questions that that I've been asking even before the sort of pandemic enabled these films to be something that opera companies thought were possible, which I think was a big, you mentioned the sort of shift in the opera company thinking. I think the pandemic, because they had to do something, and film was the thing they could do. But before that, there wasn't really, if we had gone to an opera company and said, we want to make a movie for you, I don't think that they wouldn't have even known what that meant, you know. So I think it was a unique moment, and I think we're questioning now what comes next. And I think it is going to be, I mean, opera is certainly moving in a direction that is more, I think is more welcoming of technology in production elements. And you have composers like Michel van der Aa, who's doing a lot with film and, you know, holograms and, you know, really heavy tech stuff with these opera performances. So I think it's an interesting, exciting time. I think, you know, I'll say it's, you know, you mentioned that, you know, there's this moment now where opera companies are really embracing new work. I mean, it's one of these things where it's like, I feel like there's been a group of us who have been really pushing this for
Long time.
15 years, 20 years. I mean, Beth's, I forget how long ago your company started, but it's since the beginning of Beth's company, this has been the mission, is to start to commission and develop new works by you know, upcoming composers, and to really challenge the form. And so I think we're having a discussion now about challenging the form, and what does opera in the 21st century mean? What can it be that it couldn't have been before for technological or other reasons, and what does it need to be that it hasn't been before? I think it's a really exciting time. It's also a difficult time because we're figuring a lot of stuff out. And it feels like the stakes are very high because they're important questions.
My friend Rachel Blau Duplessis, a poet and critic and thinker, she lives in Philadelphia. She's a loyal member of the, you know, Friends of the Opera there. And she came to the opening, and she said to me, "This is the future of opera." She was very excited. So,
Can we quote her on that? That's a great quote.
yeah,
I want that quote.
Rachel.
Well, if there are no other questions, oh, there's one here.
I think it's an interesting problem because, you know, when you hear the word opera, you have a very specific idea of what it contains. And I think that's interesting. Are there more places for performances besides our idea of opera houses? I mean, is it moving into smaller spaces? Or,
Yeah, definitely.
are there any in New York City that, I mean, just on Amato,
Yeah.
it used to be,
No,
Right.
so
of course, I can't imagine them performing your piece, but on the other
Right.
hand, are there new venues, or are there venues that are across?
There are, you know, I think, you know, again, I'll shout out the Prototype Festival, which happens every January, which is a kind of hub for this kind of new work that's happening, and that happens in various venues around town. I can't remember exactly. Beth is, you should connect with Beth, and she'll tell you all about all the different venues.
No, I think it's amazing.
But it is, and I think also composers have started to, you know, there's the idea of a you know, an Aida scale opera, where with horses and you know, and you know, I think those of us, the composers of my generation, who have been doing this kind of, you know, for lack of a word, like progressive work in opera, started and we decided we weren't going to wait for those opportunities. We were going to make our own opportunities, and we were going to make an opera, and maybe that meant it was a string quartet and one singer or two singers, but it can still, you know, I think there are so many pieces now that make a really strong case for chamber opera. And, you know, a project that Beth and I did years ago called Dog Days is a chamber opera, but it's amplified, so it feels huge. But it's, I think, 13 people on stage total, right? So
Maybe it's a little like going back to Monteverdi and
kind of, yeah, in a way,
simplicity.
It really is. You know, it's back to the origins before we needed camels going across the stage.
Any other questions, comments? All right, well, thank you all for
Thank
coming.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful
Vincent,
conversation.
Katz, David, Little.